We are coming on the air with a major development in the legal proceedings surrounding Donald Trump. In just the past few hours, the atmosphere in Washington has shifted sharply following a judicial decision that has caught the entire Capitol off guard. A federal judge has unsealed a significant collection of evidence connected to special counsel Jack Smith's investigation. These are documents that had been kept under strict seal, unavailable to the public until now. The disclosure of these files, particularly those tied to the classified documents indictment, has set off an immediate and intense political response. What's unfolding is far from the usual slow-moving pace of a Washington investigation. Instead, we're witnessing an acceleration that is rarely seen in modern political history. Within 24 hours of this material becoming public, members of Congress have moved past the usual calls for inquiries or impeachment and are now openly raising the possibility of arrest. To understand why the reaction has been this significant, we have to examine the mechanics of what just happened. The Department of Justice had been preparing for a controlled release of reports to Congress. That was the plan, a careful, methodical handover. However, the federal judge overseeing the timeline effectively overruled that pace, deciding that transparency could not be delayed. The result was not a slow leak, but a flood of information that has required legislators from both parties to address the findings immediately. Let's examine the substance of these unsealed files, because understanding the specific charges is the only way to understand the response we are seeing on Capitol Hill. The indictment mentioned in these documents is not a vague list of complaints. It is a detailed 38-count federal indictment. 37 of those counts specifically target Donald Trump. The headline charge here is the willful retention of national defense information. In legal reporting, we use these terms frequently, but it's important to clarify precisely what they mean because each word carries real legal significance. Retention simply refers to the act of keeping something, but willful is the key legal hinge. It signals that the action was deliberate. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a situation where a staff member misplaced a box. Willful retention means the person understood they had these documents, understood they were not permitted to keep them, and made a conscious decision to hold on to them anyway. The materials at the center of this case are not personal notes or private journals. They are classified as national defense information. Under the Espionage Act, this category includes material that could be to harm the United States or aid a foreign power. It represents the highest level of sensitivity, involving the protection of American intelligence assets and military personnel. The indictment also includes a charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice. To understand this, it helps to break the term down. Under federal law, a conspiracy means that at least two individuals agreed to commit a criminal act. By bringing this charge, the grand jury, made up of everyday citizens, not elected officials, has concluded there is probable cause to believe that Donald Trump acted in partnership with at least one other person to stop the government from recovering these documents. This points to an organized effort, a coordinated plan rather than a single, isolated decision. The unsealed material also outlines accusations of corruptly concealing a document or record. This is a legal phrase that refers to intentionally hiding evidence to interfere with an investigation. According to the allegations, when the National Archives sought these documents as early as May 2021, the response involved refusal to cooperate and attempts to keep the materials out of investigators' reach. The newly released evidence reportedly describes a pattern of misleading statements and inaccurate representations made to federal officials. So why is Congress reacting so quickly? Why are we seeing calls for arrest within a single news cycle? It comes down to the nature of the evidence that has been released. In a polarized Washington, it is expected that Democrats would call for accountability. That is the baseline of modern politics. Representative Jamie Raskin, a key figure on the House Judiciary Committee, quickly stated publicly that the Department of Justice cannot remain inactive if there is evidence of criminal conduct. Raskin's argument is rooted in constitutional principles. He is asserting that the DOJ has a mandate to act regardless of the political consequences. Essentially, if the evidence shows wrongdoing, failing to prosecute would undermine the department's core responsibilities. However, the true measure of the severity of these files is not the reaction from the opposition, but the response within Donald Trump's own party. Senator Lisa Murkowski, a Republican, made a statement that breaks from typical partisan defense. She stated that sealed files cannot be used to hide misconduct and that the public deserves transparency, regardless of where that misconduct reaches. When a sitting Republican senator refuses to dismiss the evidence as politically motivated and instead emphasizes transparency and accountability, it signals that the unsealed files are considered significant. In Washington, party loyalty is often the strongest force in the room. When that loyalty shows signs of strain within hours of a document release, it suggests the evidence is difficult to defend. We also need to contextualize the timing. These events are occurring in January 2025. Donald Trump is currently serving his second term as president. This is not a retrospective investigation into a former official. This is a live situation involving the sitting commander-in-chief. The administration is simultaneously pursuing a policy agenda on economic matters, immigration reform, and international relations. This unsealing presents a major challenge in the midst of governance. It creates a scenario of political strain. This happens when the executive branch becomes absorbed in legal defense and the demands of ongoing investigations, reducing its ability to carry out normal governing functions. Every press briefing, every foreign policy discussion, and every negotiation on Capitol Hill is now shaped by the material contained in these newly released files. Lawmakers are asking, how can the administration concentrate on infrastructure or tax reform when the president is facing calls for arrest tied to unsealed federal evidence? The magnitude of the situation captures nearly all attention, pushes allies to create distance, and encourages opponents to withhold cooperation. Let's take a closer look at the grand jury component highlighted in the reports. It's crucial to emphasize that this indictment did not come from Joe Biden, the media, or members of Congress. It was handed down by a grand jury in the Southern District of Florida. In practical terms, this means a panel of everyday citizens examined the evidence presented by special counsel Jack Smith and concluded that there was probable cause to bring criminal charges. This distinction undercuts the idea that the case is driven exclusively by Washington insiders. The Justice Department's core guiding principle, as noted in the special report, is a commitment to the rule of law. The decision to unseal these records further reinforces the notion that no individual, including a sitting president, is exempt from legal standards designed to safeguard national security. The newly released documents also appear to link investigations that were previously viewed as separate. There are signals that the handling of these classified materials may intersect with other legal inquiries, including matters connected to January 6th. When investigators examine intent and motive, they look for patterns. The unsealed evidence suggests that retaining these documents may have been part of a broader operational approach within the Trump organization. Next, we analyze the specific claim of false statements. This is often the charge that results in significant legal consequences for high-profile individuals. Historically, cover-ups can create greater legal risk than the initial act. The indictment alleges that federal investigators were provided with inaccurate statements. In federal investigations, providing false information is a felony. If the unsealed evidence contains proof, such as recordings, emails, or witness accounts, that Donald Trump or his associates misled investigators, it represents a serious legal matter. So what happens next? The unsealing of these files has created a complex situation. There is a judiciary enforcing transparency, Congress is responding with concern and calls for action, and the Department of Justice is under pressure to advance the case despite the challenges of prosecuting a sitting president. The calls for arrest are notable because they bypass the political process of impeachment. Impeachment is a political procedure. Arrest is a legal one. By using that terminology, members of Congress are emphasizing that this is considered a criminal matter, not simply a political issue. For the Trump administration, the strategy of delaying and sealing information has reached a limit. The plan was to keep details unclear and focus debate on process. Now the substantive information is public. The public can review the charges, the demands from the National Archives, and the reported movement of boxes in attempts to manage the investigation. The reality is that the legal system relies on facts, while the political system often operates on perception. At this moment, both systems present challenges for the administration. The facts outlined in the indictment involve sensitive government information. The perception, shaped by bipartisan reactions in Congress, is that a significant line may have been crossed. The days ahead will be pivotal. We are closely watching whether the Department of Justice, under the Attorney General's leadership, chooses to comply with requests coming from Congress. We are also observing how Republican leadership responds, whether they continue to stand behind Donald Trump or whether internal divisions begin to widen. This moment goes beyond a routine news update. It represents a direct test of the American constitutional framework. Can the federal government function when the nation's chief executive is confronting grand jury allegations tied to national security? And can Congress effectively oversee and hold a president accountable while that president is still in office? These are not abstract debates anymore. These questions are being openly weighed right now on the floors of both the House and the Senate. And as we track every development, one core fact remains. Evidence tied to the security of the United States was unsealed, and those who reviewed it from both political parties judged the situation to be significant. That is the reality at this hour. We will continue providing updates as this story progresses.
I'm going to start in a place where some of you probably expect me to, others do not, and that is with the vote this evening, late afternoon, in the Indiana Senate, in which the Indiana Senate rejected a new mid-decade redistricting map for the House of Representatives, the US House of Representatives, that the Trump administration had put enormous pressure on them to pass. And the vote wasn't even close. The vote was 31-19, which meant that 21 Republicans, the majority of the Republican conference, voted with the Democrats to say no to those new gerrymandered maps. I think this is a big deal. And here's why it's a big deal. It's a big deal because Trump and his cronies are putting huge pressure on Republican-dominated state legislatures to change the maps for the House of Representatives before the 2026 elections. Now, this is really rare. It's extremely rare for a state legislature to redistrict in the middle of a decade, because normally redistricting happens every 10 years because of our census that is mandated by the Constitution every 10 years, in which all the people in an area are counted, and that counting determines how many seats the members of that state will get in the House of Representatives. And in 1929, that number was capped at a certain level. Until then, it just kept increasing. And had it continued to increase according to the formula that was in play before 1929, we would have a House of Representatives that has more than 1,000 people in it. So this capping of the number of people in the House of Representatives